Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. As you heard, my name is Gary Arthur, for those of you who haven't met yet. And firstly, I'd like to say thanks for having us here tonight. Us is myself and Jean sitting there. She came all the way just to be here as well. So thanks very much for having us. I'm just going to give you a very brief rundown on some of the things that I've done. Slade asked me to tell you about some of the things that I've been involved in. So we'll start with that. So Slade's the reason I'm standing here tonight, because we've known each other for 25 years. So he's known some of the things I've been involved in, and he asked me to come and tell you a little bit about them. I want to start off, that's my dad on the right-hand side, Johnny Arthur, and I grew up in a very loving family. His history, he did 23 amateur fights in eight months, I believe, and went to the 1948 Olympics, and he was South African heavyweight champion for 10 years, undefeated. No South African ever beat him. It was 48 to 58. So those are big shoes to try and follow. I'll tell you firstly about him. I always wanted to fly. From my earliest memories, I wanted to fly. I can't tell you why, but unlike anyone else, I didn't grow out of that phase. I still wanted to fly, still do. And we couldn't afford flying lessons. We stayed out in the country. Our family I wasn't going to get flying paid for. I couldn't work at that stage. I was far outside town. So the only way I was going to do this is by going to the Air Force. So obviously I was very interested in that. And one day when I was 12 years old, my dad arranged with the local police chief, because there was an Alouette 3 in town, and they were doing daggaops, marijuana eradication. And the police chief arranged a flight for us. So when I was 12, I got to go fly with my dad in the front seat. I was very jealous of him because I had to sit in the back, but I was okay, I was flying. That was the very first flight I ever had in my life, except for jumping off the roof with an umbrella. And he arranged it. When we landed, somebody took a photograph, and we'll get more into that a little bit later. But he arranged my very first flight. So I'm going to go through very briefly. I did national service for about 14 months in the Air Force Regiment, guarding air bases, etc. Learned to fly at Donata, and I know a lot of you guys have probably seen quite a bit of the Air Force history, so I'm not going to elaborate too much. You're welcome to ask me questions afterwards. That's the Harvard that we learnt on. I then flew Cessna 185s. The guy in the picture there, his name is Guy Jackson, and he lives about 5 minutes away from Slade, which is a weird coincidence. Also flew the Atlas Oryx. That's in the Drakensberg Mountains. Not my photograph, but I really like it. That's my brother sitting in the cockpit at Hoedspruit Air Force Base. They had an open day, and he came there. And he has a handicap. He cannot speak. He's mute, but he can hear. And he also loves aircraft, so that is a great day for him. And you'll see a lot of what I'm describing tonight. It's not just about me. It's not just about flying. It's about people and how important they are. Every one of you sitting here tonight is sitting here because of the people, not because of just what somebody's done. And that's what I find interesting about it. So one of the people sitting here tonight, Jaco Klopper, with the blue shirt over there, he's looking embarrassed. I was involved in this with him. This is in 1994. And Jaco, you're welcome to speak up and correct me if I'm wrong on something. This is the South African Agricultural Union building, which caught fire. And I happened to be, actually I was not on standby that day. I had a colleague who wanted to go drinking or something, asked me to do his standby, which I said, fine, I'll do that. And about an hour later, they called us out, said, there's a building on fire, you must go. He wanted to fly again. I said, nope, I've got it. He lost out. So anyway, Jaco showed incredible presence of mind, things that I would never have thought of. He knew it as a rescue, and we did not know what we were going into. We had a very experienced flight engineer, warrant officer Kenny van Straten, great guy. And Jaco asked him, grab a bunch of extra strops for the rescue hoist, because like a horse collar which goes around you. So he grabbed a few extra ones, and Jaco grabbed another flight engineer who happened to be walking past, Jacques Grobler, and said, come with. And this is all very fortuitous, and it shows that presence of mind, that thinking ahead. It was literally life-saving. So the building was on fire, as you can see in that picture. There were 4 people that were trapped on a ledge they couldn't get out of that building. There were police helicopters that were flying there. There were 3 of them, and I believe it was Jerry Broberg, Fred Fulune, and Griffiths. It's not important, but they were coordinating very well between them, and they're rescuing people on the roof of the building and then flying them off down to the street. And they had this daisy chain going, rescuing people. And when we showed up, they wanted us to take these people off the ledge because they were not equipped with hoists. That is a picture taken from a movie, from a news report, hovering right next to the roof. And the great thing about it, the roof was only about 6 feet below us. So Jaco, flying from the right seat, had a fantastic reference point, which is what is important when you're hovering a helicopter. And because he had such a stable hover, he was great at that. The flight engineers are doing their job. I was sitting in the left seat, watching the instruments and wondering what else to do. So I was taking pictures out the cockpit. Well, that's the only one I've still got. We'll talk about that in a minute. So this is a photograph of Jacques going down. He didn't even have his flight suit on because we left in such a hurry. So he came down. You can see the 4 people standing on the ledge. He rescued one of them. And then I think he realized that fire was spreading so quick. There was no way that he was going to rescue 4 people by going up one at a time. So this one, you can see, is carrying the other 3 people. Now the hoist is only rated for 600 pounds. So I think it's grossly overloaded, but we always knew there's a safety factor involved. But if he hadn't done that, I don't think those people would have survived. Very, very brave man. That's actually, I believe, taken after the fire spread through that floor. And you can see there was no hiding away from that. Those people wouldn't have made that. So great presence of mind for Jaco. I think he saved people's lives. This picture was taken in 1995, just before I left the military. This is also on a Dakar Ops. And that's all marijuana in the back of the helicopter. We intercepted a caravan of donkeys that come down from Lesotho, that is neighboring country inside South Africa. And these donkeys were carrying about, sometimes, I think 3 or 4 bags of this stuff. Well, when we came up, the donkeys ran away, the owners ran away. So we had to recover all this stuff and took it back to get burnt. But while I was flying on this operation, the flight engineer was an older guy by the name of Andre Geyser. He was a flight sergeant. And not on this day, but another day, we were flying along and the weather was atrocious. Very low cloud, bad visibility. And he made a comment that the last time he had flown in weather that bad was in White River. Started asking him questions. He was a flight engineer on that Alouette that took me for my very first flight ever. This is now 12, 13 years later. What are the chances of him flying Alouette still? It's just an amazing coincidence for me. And he has that photograph in his bar. And I regret to this day that I never got a copy from him. And I don't even know if he's alive anymore. But I found that very interesting. So this started another phase of my life. I knew I was leaving the military. The government had changed at that stage. I got a call from a gentleman by the name of Charlie Tate, who's well known in the aviation industry, particularly in the Air Force. Very interesting gentleman in his own right. He called me on a Saturday morning and he said, do you want to join Executive Outcomes? I knew a little bit about what happened. Apparently he was a shoe salesman in Germany. That was his cover story. But they had been fighting in Angola. I wasn't particularly interested in going to Angola just because of the history that we had with Angola. But this job was in Sierra Leone. It took me a few hours to accept it. And I called him and said, yeah, I want to be part of that. Now, Executive Outcomes is one of the first private military companies, a mercenary outfit. And I really had some very strong doubts when I accepted it. And I can say that I'm incredibly proud of being part of that outfit for a couple of reasons. Firstly, there were 9 guys flying for EO, as we call them. And for them to have called me and asked me to be part of that group was incredibly flattering. I was humbled because there were some big names in that group. Arthur Walker won the Honoris Cooks twice. Carl Alberts won it once. Some very experienced and very good guys. The other reason is maybe I was only one stupid enough to accept it, but I'm going to go with the first thing. The second thing is, and I'll cover it now, we were fighting against a group called the Revolutionary United Front. And they were thugs, they were terrorists. Most of you guys have experience with terrorism. It was outright brutality. That's how they suppressed the population. So they would ask you a question. They'd come out of the bush, they'd capture a farmer or a villager, and they'd ask him, short sleeves or long sleeves? And there's no right answer. Short sleeves, you got your arms cut off at the elbow. You want long sleeves, they got cut off at the wrist. This was to serve as an example to other people, not to stand up against them. That was probably the most common and one of the nicest things that they did. Like, they were really brutal. They would also take a machete, a panga, and cut guys in the back of the neck, cut the tendons so their head would fall down. Could never ever lift your head up again. But the most moving one for me was Charlie and myself. We became friends with this little guy at the airport. He lived there, had no family. I think his name was Hassan, and he was about 5 or 6 years old. His hands were like that. He had no fingers. The RAF had put his hands into a fire and burnt his fingers off. That healed already. So this must have happened when he was about 2, 3 years old. I have no qualms about fighting somebody that'll do that to a child. So that's why I say I'm very proud of the time that I had there. I think we saved thousands of lives or people from being horribly maimed. Some of you guys will know that guy on the left there, Neil Ellis, very well known in the SAF, Ryan Hogan, Mike Guy, Percy Ferreira, and Chris Lowe, the late Chris Lowe. Some really good people. I was very proud to have worked with these guys. Another picture, Steve Lombard on the left, Charlie Tate in the middle there, Juba Jaber, Mark van Zorgenfrey, and Chris again. That is what I got a chance to fly a little bit. It's a Mi-24, it's a Russian-made gunship. Pilot flew in the back seat, co-pilot in the front, gunner in the front. That was my job over there. And for the military guys, I'll explain a little bit about that. You can see, pilot sits in the back, his door opens to the right-hand side, just like the UE Cobra in Vietnam. The front cockpit, the door opens from the left side. So if it rolls over, one of you can get out to help the other guy. I believe that's the logic behind it. This is just to show you what the armament looks like. You've got a 12.7 millimeter Gatling gun on the nose there. It's a Yak B, I believe is the designation. Fires about 3,000 rounds a minute, an incredibly powerful weapon. These over there were probably the favorites. It's an AGS-17 grenade launcher. It's a 40 millimeter grenade launcher. It fires about 400 to 600 rounds a minute. Incredibly effective weapon. And then we also flew with external fuel tanks because the internal fuel just wasn't enough in a country of that size. This is Charlie and myself just before an operation. And this is just another interesting. I find these episodes to be so bizarre sometimes. Tony brought it up. I was sick that day. I'm lying on the ground sleeping, and it's about 35 degrees. It's humid. Somehow on that flight to this place, which is the other side of the country in Koidu, I got sick. I don't know what it was. It may be malaria. The doctor tested me, said, yeah, you probably got malaria, but to this day, I don't know what I had. But on the way back from Koidu, they wanted us to do a strike. And I was flying with Juba Jaber, and about 5 minutes away from the strike, I wasn't going to make it. I needed to throw up. Luckily, I'd had some forethought. I had a bag with me. So I threw up. So I ended up doing the strike with a bag of warm puke in my left hand. I don't recommend the experience. So this is just out of interest what the front cockpit of the Mi-24 looks like. This was taken at a museum in Russia somewhere. This is what I was busy with. This is a sight for that Gatling gun. I don't remember what those do. This button over there I'll tell you about shortly. That over there is to control the elevation of the gun. And then whichever way you turn, the whole thing will determine where it's pointing. And you're looking through a sight over there. That handle on the left-hand side is kind of spring-loaded. As you grab the handles, you push that towards it. That activates the gun. Now it'll move. If you don't press that button in, the gun won't move. And then it's got 2 red buttons over there, which are your fire buttons. That thing over there has got 3 positions, and they're basically blank rounds. And I'm getting very technical, I know. But the American Gatling guns work on it's got a motor that turns these barrels, fires up to 6,000 rounds a minute. This one is different, also has a motor, but it feeds the rounds as the breech is rotating. The American ones don't have an issue where this one does. A round will be loaded, but if you fire it, the gun is hot. It'll cook off a round inside that breech. Now, it shears the rivets in the gun. I've destroyed a few of them. It's a fault that I think that exists with the gun, but whatever. When it works very well. If you think that's going to happen, or you have a dud round and the gun won't work, you move that switch. One of those three positions, it fires a blank, and it physically turns that breech and ejects the round. And that's how you can keep going. So, once again, just out of interest for the military guys. Some of the guys I flew with, Charlie Tate, Juba Jube. Charlie is a very interesting and funny person. Chris Lowe again. I did go to Angola very briefly. This is to fly these Mi-8s, which had come out of storage. Also some well-known guys, Willie Venter, Swanee Swanepoel, and Sunny Janneke. This was a day of interest as well. So I ended up at Executive Outcomes for about 2 years on and off. Just when we achieved the goal of kicking the RAF out, the United Nations kicked us out of Sierra Leone. Took about 10 days for the RAF to come back. Threatened them again. They were at the gates of Freetown. Then they decided to call us back. We had to kick them out again. Well, after about a couple of years of this, they finally kicked us out the country. And the next installment was going to Papua New Guinea. That photograph was taken in Papua New Guinea. Bit of history. The Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, Sir Julius Chan, had been having problems with a low-level insurgency at the Panguna mine in Bougainville. And he had applied for international aid to help sort this problem out, never materialized. So he contacted Sandline, which is similar to Executive Outcomes. We ended up there. There was a bit of a low-level military coup. Sir Julius Chan was under pressure, and they deported us. So I didn't see very much, and we didn't do anything there. But it was an interesting experience. This was during the deportation flight, and some of you may know this gentleman, Mike Borlase. He was in the Royal Navy as a helicopter pilot, then in Rhodesia as a helicopter pilot, and also as a Sulu Scout. Was captured in Zambia and held for about 14 months, I believe. Very interesting guy. Bill McQuaid sitting next to him, also very interesting. Had been in Vietnam. He had fought in Rhodesia, Sri Lanka, all over the place. Some very interesting characters. And then Mike Guy on the right there, a very experienced flight engineer and a real gentleman. From there, Charlie Tate, once again his name crops up. I got to go with him to Libya. We called this Maya because it looks like a bee. And it had a camera mounted on the left-hand side there, infrared, a very, very powerful camera. They told us we were there to train the Libyan Special Forces. They weren't special at all. They were useless. So I think this is a cover story. We did try and teach them how to do some fast roping. It was a disaster. We had a whole bunch of ex-reccees working there, trying to train these guys, and they were tearing their hair out. But I think we were there to try and find this insurgent group in the Green Mountains, the Jebel al-Akhtar, and we searched there for a couple of weeks. We modified the aircraft with 9-volt batteries and LEDs to provide lighting, and we were flying with night vision goggles. That was interesting, but we didn't find anything. Because of my experience with the Mi-8, I ended up doing firefighting in South Africa. That was working on fire. Also did some logging in Malaysia. That's the size of the logs that you haul out the jungle there. Logging is arguable, but this is more sustainable than traditional logging, where they're actually using bulldozers to drag the logs out the jungle. It's a friendlier way of doing it. Did some election support in Mozambique. That was in about 99, I believe. Did some power line construction there as well, in Swaziland, Mozambique. And then I went to this, it's called the Jolly Rubino. It's a ship which caught fire in the Indian Ocean. A friend of mine, Nick Cook, rescued the crew, and it ran aground off St. Lucia. It had a lot of hazmat on board. These guys are the salvage crew, and they would go into these containers. You can see how it's all blown up. That's from the heat of that fire. It was very intense. everything had basically melted into a slag, and these guys were trying to get it out of there. It was very dangerous work, very difficult work. The whole ship was listing at about a 15-degree angle. That's what it looked like. That's when most of the containers had been removed. They eventually blew that up. It became a reef. More interesting stories that came out of that as well. And they would load the stuff into those green skips you see underneath the helicopter there, and we'd put them in the containment area, and then they would dispose of the hazmat that was there. After that, I also got involved with this ship salvage off Cape Town. It's the Sealand Express. We call it the Sea Sand Express. And once again, recovering hazmat off that. The most important one was a container full of tequila. No matter where we went in Cape Town, if somebody heard or knew that we were from or working on this, the first thing they'd ask us, like, where's the tequila? They're very concerned about that. I've already shown you quite a bunch of things. I've always thought myself as being quite a loyal person in that I want to go to a company, I want to get to know everyone, know my job, and stay there. But if you look at my resume, you'll see no proof of that whatsoever. I have hopped around to many places. I have to say in my defense, not all of it has been my choice. A lot of the seasonal work, like firefighting, was only for 3 or 4 months, and then you're out of a job. That's why I ended up doing all these other things. This is flying this Hughes 500 in Madagascar for a timber company. They still owe me money. There's a patent there as well. Also got to fly, that's the guy on the right-hand side, Carlo Machinet, also well known in the Air Force. Great guy. And we got to fly between South Africa and Liberia. I got to fly around Charles Taylor, the ex-president of Liberia. Man, what a thug. Also did a bit of flight instruction. You can see my petite frame in a little Robinson 22, it's a tiny little helicopter, but I actually quite enjoyed it, learned a lot. Also flew in the Mozambique floods. Slade was there. This was in about 2000. I was flying around with the Minister of Health. Had some incredible experiences there. Then got to fly with a company called Sapphire Air. You can see the marking on the side there. It's basically Eskom, and they do power line maintenance. They'd offered me a job. I turned them down, much to my regret, until I found out what they did. And then I asked them for a job, and I had to fly this. It's got a big white box underneath it. It has cameras, very high-end cameras, and lasers in there, LiDAR. So they do 3D terrain mapping of vegetation. It's incredibly accurate. Can even work out the sag in power lines. Like during the day, a power line heats up, it'll sag about 6 inches or so. And the stuff was accurate enough to detect that. This was when they finally offered me a job to do the power line maintenance. It was a very select outfit. I'm very proud to have worked for them because you were handpicked. It was a very, very tight group. Well-known guys, very challenging work, very difficult, but a fantastic time. When you shut down a power line, in those days, and I'm talking about 2000 now, I was told that it's costing about R1 million an hour as long as that power line is de-energized. So they developed this technique called live line, and that guy on the left-hand side there is sitting on lines that are energized. That one looks like a 275,000 volt line, and he's wearing a suit. It's about 25% like a steel mesh. He's got gloves, boots, etc., and like a hood, and it basically creates a Faraday cage around him so he doesn't get shocked. Aside from that, he's not grounded, so he's not getting a flashover of that voltage, but there is a difference between his potential voltage and the line itself. So when he does grab it, he grabs it and he holds on, because if you let go and you grab it again, you're getting shocked again. They learn that lesson very quickly. That guy, or that team on the right-hand side there, those are what we call the dead side, because they are grounded to the tower. And what we're doing there in that particular job is replacing these insulators. What they do is they attach these hot sticks, these tools between them, and they take the tension of the line, and then I can take the insulators out with a helicopter and bring in another set. The whole time that line is energized. That took a lot. I was also working with Arthur Walker there. A very great group of guys. This is another job we did, putting a machine onto the shield wire, onto the ground wire, and it would attach fiber optic cable, called an ad-lash system, which unfortunately didn't work very well because we found out that vultures liked the taste of the adhesive, and they would chew the strapping off so the line would fall down. So that's when you're doing this work And you can see the cables are attached, the strops are attached to hooks under the helicopter. And I'm looking straight down. It's a very different technique to what's used in the military, doesn't transfer at all. And that's your view looking down from the top. So these three guys are being taken to the tower, not to the line. If I took them to the line, they'd be very unhappy with me. This is another aspect of the job was, these are called wind spoilers. This is out near Volksrust, which is a very windy area. Now you're attaching these plastic rods onto the shield wire, the ground wire. And the engineers tell me that this prevents the wire from swaying. To me, you're adding drag to it. It never made sense to me, but we ended up doing it anyway. You actually had Teflon tape, blade tape, on the front window of the helicopter. Otherwise, it would rub against the wire and it would damage it. So very, very precise work. Also ended up going up to Kenya for the World Rally Championships. They wanted helicopters to support the leaning cars there because they don't close the track. It's open to the public. There's elephants, donkeys, anything on the track. So they'd have us helicopters fly ahead of the cars and warn them if there's anything on the track. We flew past Kilimanjaro, and in our ignorance, we climbed up to about 16,000 feet without oxygen, not realizing that the top's a lot higher than what we are. So at 16,000, we looked at it and realized, let's turn back. So we descended it down again, but still an incredible experience. I then got to fly in Madagascar again. That's the guy, Vaughan Khoos, also very well-known helicopter guy. And we were flying this guy around, Mark Ravalomanana. He was the president of Madagascar. I became his personal pilot for about a year. He still owes me money. This picture, and I'm sorry if I'm going to bore you, but these are one of those weird stories that happen in life, those apocalypse now moments where you're thinking like, what am I doing here? How did I get here? Mark had won the election. The previous president, Didier Ratsirach, refused to hand over power. And because he controlled the military, they tried to blow up the bridge. They didn't do a very good job, but they did disrupt the motor vehicle traffic. Well, I'd flown Mark there that day, so I'd flown this helicopter, and then Jimmy Horsley, another well-known South African military guy, he arrived in a different helicopter, EC120. And him and I were sitting just talking, and Mark came up to me and said, "Can you help? Somebody fell into the river." So here I am thinking of a rescue. Well, that wasn't the case. This poor guy had fallen off the bridge there. He'd fallen into a river, been washed downstream. They tried to rescue him. Nobody could get in. It's actually flowing very, very fast. He had crawled up into a rock, and he died there. Well, they wanted to get his body back, and they couldn't reach it from the side. The river was just too strong. So Mark's asking me to recover him, and like, we don't have anything. We don't have hooks in the helicopter. We got nothing. All we got is a helicopter. So we borrowed a rope from somebody, and we rigged it around the skids, not of this one, on the EC120. And Jimmy, because he's braver than I am, volunteered to stand on the skid. So I flew him out to this rock, and I'm looking straight down. Well, first I dropped him off. And this rock is just big enough to hold this guy's body as he's holding on there. And Jimmy's trying to straddle him without falling into the river himself. It was difficult for him. So once I dropped him off, I went back, hooked up the rope, put a stone on the end of the rope to keep it stable. And I fly the stone out to Jimmy, who grabs the end of the rope, throws the stone away. And now he's trying to get this rope around this poor guy's body. And I'm watching from above, and I'm just watching him holding on this guy's arm. And it's awful. But the rigor mortis had set in. And he had to literally lever this guy's arms up so he could get this rope around him. So I eventually pulled him off, flying him, hanging like this back to the side. It's like, this is only in Africa. This would never happen anywhere else. That's just a picture just to show where we would land. I can say that Madagascar was some of the most difficult flying, the most challenging and most dangerous I've ever done. You'd never think so, but it's a very tough place to operate. From there, I went to Banda Aceh. This is in Sumatra, when they had the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami. About 240,000 people were killed that they know of throughout the southern Pacific region. Banda Aceh, and you can see all the water. We talk about people once again. Yaku was there as well, working for the World Food Program, running the program. Well, I showed up there working for Starlight Aviation. We were flying people, supplies around. Very interesting time and very sad. Our interpreter had lost every single one of his family. Every single one, his wife, his kids, his grandparents, his parents. And yet, just very cheerful, always smiling. I don't know how these guys did it. People, once again, that gentleman, Cameron Delzeal, a very sad story, a really, really great guy. He was flying with us. As you can see, he got along with the kids. And he was working in Thailand, flying helicopters, flew back to Europe to go and do simulator training. And he was on Malaysian Airlines Flight 17, to shot down over the Ukraine with a surface-to-air missile. You just never know. So while I was in Banda Aceh, I heard this helicopter talking on the radio, and it sounded interesting. I happened to be nearby. So I flew up, said to him, "Can I come and see what you're doing?" Guy says yes. He was flying this small plane which had landed on a road, because there were no runways there. He had crashed off the side of the runway, off the road, sorry. And this guy was flying the wreckage out to some place where it could be retrieved. I ended up flying a little bit too close to him, which I got into trouble for. But the guy in the yellow hat, his name is Al Blaine. He's one of the two owners of Billings Flying Services. The other one is Gary Blaine. And I invited him for a braai over the radio, and he actually showed up, and we exchanged details, and I stayed in contact with him. Really good guy. We'll get more about him later on. I did a bit of firefighting in Spain. That is not Noordhoek, by the way. That is the Bay of Biscay in the background. Just a picture taken at some of those fires there. That is a pretty cool one, I thought. So while I was in Spain, I met a gentleman flying on a fire, working for a company called Aviation. And they had helicopters in Spain. And I said, "Hey, I live in Spain. I can fly for you guys and try and look after the operation." And they hired me. And 2 days after they hired me, the chief pilot comes in and says, "Well, the Spanish have changed the contract. They don't want pilots anymore." So I had a job with this company, and they were very, very good to me. They put me directly into an S61, which they never, ever do. They tried really hard to look after me. But I was commuting between Spain and Louisiana in the United States. I wasn't making any money out of it. So while I was doing this, I got a call from Al Blaine, the guy that I met in Indonesia like over a year and a half before, asking if I want to do firefighting. Like, yep, I'm tired of the offshore world. So I left my car at New Orleans airport. I never saw it again. I flew out to Arizona, flew with his brother Gary. So this was during the 2006 fire season. I had an engine failure. You can see the smoke coming out of the jet pipe in the back of the helicopter over there. That engine had seized. It had taken a couple of minutes to happen, so I knew it was on its way, but I managed to keep the bucket still attached to the belly there, because it was only one in the country. I was trying to look after it. But I managed to land back on my pad, literally back on the pad, without an engine, which was actually one of the better landings I've put down for a while. Well, that guy in the middle there, that's Gary Blaine, Al's brother, and a Forest Service guy I'm still in touch with to this day. They flew me back to Billings, Montana. This is only a couple hundred miles away, replaced the engine, and did some test flights, went back to the fire. And 4 days later, the same thing happened again. This time, I had to drop the bucket over there and ended up in the river. As you can see, I did not have too many options at that time, because I had a couple of seconds to decide. I had to chop down a small tree going in there, but anyway, I got on the ground. I wasn't hurt. The aircraft, they repaired the blades. I think it got a dent in the skid from landing on a stone. I don't feel bad about it. You can see the oil leaking out of it over there. They recovered the aircraft, and I flew it again the next year. So I did 2 seasons with them, and they treated me very well. Also did some what they call Christmas bows. There's about 150 helicopters, which is a lot, that spend the end of every year on the west coast of the United States flying Christmas trees. That's how big the industry is. This case, we're flying those things. Those are the boughs. It's the tips of the fir trees, which they make into Christmas wreaths that go on your door of your house. This is busy. I remember on my resume, I put down on the fact that I had done 96 sling loads while I was in the Air Force. And you're trying to enhance your qualifications, right? In this job, you'll do about 300 to 500 a day in a long day. So 96 wasn't very impressive. It's very demanding flying, but can also be a lot of fun. I went back into power line flying like an idiot. This is down in Texas. It's a bit of a different way of flying compared to what we did in South Africa. Much more close proximity like this. A lot of concentration lowering those guys. I worked really hard to give them a stable platform. You can imagine trying to climb off a helicopter onto a power line pole. This has got to be pretty nerve-wracking. So I tried to make it as easy as I possibly could for those guys. This is replacing cross arms, just one of the jobs that we did. There you can see with 2 guys on the left side, we had to put barbells on the right-hand side as a counterweight. There's about 75 pounds of barbells, I believe. This is another thing we did called the hot seat, that over there. That guy is changed or putting on those dampers. You can see they've been installed there, not on those lines. This is part of a wind turbine project. Can you imagine in a windy area they didn't put dampers on the line? So this brings out the nature of that kind of work. It's not very forgiving. This was in Massachusetts, working for a new customer. There's the expression in aviation about all the Swiss cheese, all the holes lining up. Many mistakes were made. And that picture is quite unique, taken by a cop on the ground who was guarding the roads for us. So that's me, the dummy in the front there. That wire is over the tail of the helicopter. I can't see it because those guys are standing in the way. Those are the linemen. They're not our linemen. They belong to a different company. They weren't sure what to look for. I couldn't see past them. Didn't realize something was wrong until that wire snapped and it wrapped around the main road ahead like that. So basically from about 50 feet, we fell. We hit pretty hard. The best thing that came out of it for me was that I fought every foot of that 50 foot. I actually broke the cyclic off. Now, if you guys have ever seen a cyclic on the helicopter, it is a serious, it's not designed to break. I snapped it off. You can in fact see it lying there. I snapped it off at the ground where it goes into the cabin. So the 2 linemen on the side, the one guy broke his leg, the other guy broke his arm, above and below the elbow. I ended up breaking a couple of vertebrae, some ribs on my spine, punctured lung, I think a broken sternum, which isn't much fun, I can tell you. So I decided to do something safer. This is, I joined a company, Evergreen Aviation. Everyone seems to work for Evergreen for a year. That's exactly how long I lasted. I was doing simulator instruction for them in Norway. That's in Stavanger. About the first week of every month, I'd take the crews over there, run them through a simulator, and then go to, this is in Afghanistan at Kandahar. I'd give them the training on the helicopter just to basically finalize their training. That is called Stallion Ramp in Kandahar. Quite a few resources there. Wouldn't we have liked that in the military when we were in? Also got to do some flight instruction in South Africa. We did a lot of our instrument training there. So that was outside Heidelberg. So I actually got to fly around Joburg quite a bit. I enjoyed it. So then I got one of my friends in Air 2, a guy called Jesse Neyman. He had left Air 2 and he'd gone to his company, Ericsson Aircrane. And this was my dream job. That's where I really wanted to go. And a year after Jesse joined them, while I was at Evergreen, he had been telling them about me. He lied a lot, obviously told them I was a good guy, and they did actually hire me. So the Skycrane is a pretty impressive aircraft. It's got about 9,000 horsepower available to it. That particular one there, that's for firefighting. It's got a tank, carries 2,650 gallons at the most. We can normally lift about 2,000 to 2,500 most. So about 9.5 tons maximum. And my very first day at that company, I met this guy, Mel Sacanti. Very first day on the job, became friends, and we're still friends to this day. That goes into a little bit more into the future as well. That's a picture, I just thought it was a nice picture taken from directly overhead. While the guys are snorkeling, you can see the snorkel is actually in the water while they're sucking up the water. It fills up that tank in about 45 seconds. Very, very powerful. It's about 3,000 PSI driving that hydraulic snorkel. When you pull the switch, that snorkel head, which weighs, I don't know, 150 kilograms, it's a substantial thing. When you pull that trigger, that impeller drives that thing so hard, it looks like a snake in the water. It's just incredible, the power behind it. In fact, that whole aircraft is amazing. It will pull itself apart if you don't look after itself. It has that much power. I mentioned earlier this evening, I have a bad habit of volunteering for things. I did not learn my lessons in the military. So this is one of those incidents where the aircraft arrived on a ship in Lima in Peru, and I volunteered to fly it around the Andes because you can't go straight. It's 23,000 foot mountains. And we had to divert, we had to go about 3.5 hours north, then cross the Andes, then come back south again into the Amazon. And this was at a military base just on the other side of the Andes. I got to see Machu Picchu while I was there, so I just had to put that picture in. When you work in there, this is what they call a long line. That's 200 feet, roughly. so 60 meters or so. Then you've got a whole bunch extra there from that hook downwards. And the reason is that the aircraft is so wide that when you're trying to look down at the load, the line has to be long enough so you can see it. If the line is too short, it's hidden behind the fuselage of the helicopter. So you have to fly with a long line like that. It does take a very different skill set, and the guys that are good at it are just magicians. It's something beautiful to watch. So this is the camp that we were staying in. This is outside, the closest big town is called Pucallpa. This camp was made on the Ucayali River. Everything there has been brought in by barge. I stayed in one of those containers over there. Not the most fun when you consider all that water and the amount of mosquitoes and frogs and beetles. The noise at night was just incredible. So what we were doing, this is a clearing in the jungle. It's about 45 miles away, 70 k's away or so. It's in the middle of nowhere. And somehow the geologists had decided there might be oil in that area. So they'd send a helicopter in with a bunch of loggers, chainsaws. They'd rappel down. They'd cut a small hole, make the hole bigger till the helicopter can get in. So this hole is being cut from scratch by guys with chainsaws. Then they start flying stuff in. Every single thing you see in that picture has been flown in by helicopter. You can imagine how expensive this is. This is kind of the end result. That's the drill rig. Everything was flown in. That's an enormous cost. And it's amazing to me that we pay as much for water as we do for fuel. And that rig may not even be used. They'll drill a hole and then they'll decide, looking at the cost of gas and oil, whether it's worthwhile. They may just cap it and decide we'll go back there in 10 years when the price comes up. It's a very costly endeavor. Very Spartan environment. This was changing an engine out there in the camp. The engineers, the mechanics did an amazing job looking after those helicopters for us. That's just a friend of mine, Brad Warren, in the left seat there, just to see a cockpit of a Skycrane. It took us to some interesting areas, and this is one of the more interesting jobs that I did. That lifting body at the bottom there, it's called the Dream Chaser, made by Sierra Nevada Corporation. I never knew this before I did that, but they are the world's largest supplier of microsatellites, which is a satellite less than a kilogram. It's actually owned by an Iranian couple, Iranian-American now. But anyway, this was in competition to send crews to the International Space Station. And they wanted to make sure that it could fly properly underneath the Skycrane. So I had this rig on the top there with a drogue chute, which turned out to be completely useless because this aircraft is designed to fly on final approach at 300 knots. So you got what, 450 kilometers an hour or something? Very, very fast. Those control surfaces are tiny. It won't even start flying at less than 120 knots. So the drogue chute was supposed to keep it straight, and it didn't work, but we'll talk about that shortly. So this was the first captive carry we did for them, just to prove the concept that it could be flown under the helicopter. That's John Baxter. He was flying with me, the co-pilot, even though he had more experience than I had. And this guy, Steve Lindsay, really an amazing guy. I've met a couple of astronauts. They've always struck me as the most humble but thoroughly professional people I've ever met. That guy has been on 5 space shuttle missions, 4 of them as a commander. And what a fantastic guy. I still have his telephone number somewhere. Well, after a captive carry test, they sent me to, this is the Alamo Dry Lake Bed. It's about, I don't know, a couple of hours north of Las Vegas. And this was now to work for Boeing. Like I said, there's a competition to fly crews to the space station. So Sierra Nevada Corporation was the one, Boeing was the other one. This capsule, the CST-100, or CTS-100, Crew Transportation System, is the one that left the astronauts at the space station a few months ago. This is the boilerplate, not obviously the one that did actually leave them there. But we were testing the parachute systems and the landing systems for this thing. It weighs about 14,000 pounds. So what's that, 6.5 tons or so? And we took it up to, the one drop was 12,500 feet, the other one was about 14,000. Looking straight down, you can see those are the parachutes there, the mortars that fire the parachutes out, and then some drogue chutes to stabilize it. That's just after release. The drogue chutes are out. These main parachutes have opened. Now, each of these parachutes is like 90 feet in diameter. It's like, what, 27 meters? I just thought it was so beautiful because as they're opening up, they open up pretty slowly. You don't want a sudden impact on that capsule. And it looked like a jellyfish as they were slowly opening up until they'd pop into their full shape. It was magical just to watch it. Yeah, I love the experience. That's from the side, and you can see those bags in the bottom are what they will use to land on. Unlike the Apollo program where they landed in the ocean, this was designed to land on land. So it needed to stop or reduce the impact on the crew. So these bags, there's two bags. There's one inside, which you can't see, and then there's the outer one, which obviously you're looking at over there. And they have what they call blowout panels on them. At a certain pressure, those panels will rupture and will deflate slowly at a calibrated rate. So when it hits the ground, touches the ground, shall I say, the big bags will deflate first until their pressure is reduced. It only takes, I don't know, milliseconds. And then the inner bag will also rupture, and that'll slow it down even further. This was the first test, worked very well. That's what those bags look like. Pretty interesting concept, I thought. However, that was the second test a few months later, and they decided to drop even though they knew the wind was going to be too high. They weren't so concerned about the landing. They wanted to test the parachute systems. So they accepted the crosswind, which was a bad idea, and the capsule did roll over. But they apparently achieved their data from it. Went back to the Dream Chaser. This was at Edwards Air Force Base, which is a whole story on itself. It's an amazing place, amazing history. They obviously like their adornments as well. This was what they call the first free flight of the Dream Chaser. And it was all autonomous. There's no crew on board. We had to drop it on final approach, and it would descend at 300 knots, coming down like a greased anvil. And it would automatically flare. The computers would control everything just to test that it could actually fly. So this is a very important test for Sierra Nevada Corporation. That's looking straight down at it. And there's some parallax errors in photographs anyway, but that is the drogue chute. Sorry, this is the long line that is suspended from, and that's the drogue chute. And you can see there's a bit of an angle between them. Well, that continued to be a problem through all the flights that we did with them. We even tried without the chutes, the drogue chute, and it would never fly straight. It would always snake through the air. We had to figure something else out. So luckily I had done long line work and basically used the same technique where when it would swing out, you'd slide the whole helicopter over the load. That way you're not introducing any swing to it. And that's what I did, and it happened to stabilize it, because the maximum parameters of yaw was about 2 degrees. If it was more than 2, they couldn't drop. And this is going up to about 6 degrees. So I tried this, they liked the results, and we ended up on, this is a pressurized day, pressure-filled day. We had only enough fuel for 3 patterns, and on 2 of them it was like, nope, we're out of parameters. And I had a friend with me, Jamie Fallon, which we had a very interesting flying technique, but I was telling him, okay, let me try this. And Jamie would fly as accurately as possible. I was looking straight down, and when it would swing out, I'd move the whole helicopter over it, and it worked. And it got us within those parameters, and they did the drop. Unfortunately, it flew beautifully. I was like a little kid in the cockpit, giving Jamie a rundown because he was flying from the right. He turned right to get away from it, and this thing it was beautiful. But the left-hand landing gear didn't come down. The hydraulic oil was contaminated, and it ended up collapsing and went off the runway and rolled over. NASA still said that they had achieved the goals of the test, which was to release it, and it flew beautifully. So everyone was pretty depressed. However, they achieved the goals, and much beer was consumed that night. This picture is just out of interest. That is a F-15 Eagle, which they'd modified. It's got canards on the front. It's actually the elevators, the stabilators from an F-18 Hornet. And this aircraft could take off in about 500 meters compared to a standard F-15, which needs about 2,500. Incredible machine, and the reason was to land on bomb-damaged runways or take off from them. This is the opposite extreme. This is called the Lockheed Dark Star. It was developed from a Schweitzer glider. The engine has got soundproofing around it, and it's got pulleys driving that propeller, big wide blades. It's got an exhaust that runs all the way down the right-hand side and comes out almost by the tail wheel. And this was designed to fly over the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Vietnam. And they did. They flew this thing 400 feet over the ground at night, and nobody knew they were there. If it had been taped off properly, because the crew chiefs would have this fly over them at 200 feet, and if they could hear it, okay, land, we've got to figure something else out. And they would tape over the hinges, Pretty amazing aircraft, and NASA was turning that into a remotely piloted vehicle. We went into one of the NASA museums on the base, which nobody else can get to, so I feel very, very privileged to have seen this. This is the Lunar Lander Research Vehicle, and I believe this is a test one. I don't think it flew. Here's a big jet engine right in the middle of it, pointing straight down. And the point was for the Apollo program that they would take off, get to 1,000 feet, and then simulate landing like the Apollo capsule, like the Eagle, the lunar lander. Well, the jet engine provided the thrust, and when they took off, they had an endurance, a total endurance of 8 minutes. So you can imagine the pressure on the astronauts to get that to get it right the first time. So there's a big bottle over there, I believe that's the helium tank, and then these things over there are thrusters. They use hydrogen peroxide thrusters, and that one there is one that's been cut apart so you can see it. That's a nozzle, and this thing over there is made out of sterling silver. It looks like a shower head. It's literally a pipe. It's got a plate with a whole bunch of holes in, and they squirt hydrogen peroxide through there. And I had no idea, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but when you pass hydrogen peroxide under pressure through silver, it breaks down into steam. And that's how those thrusters work. 500 pounds of thrust coming out of that thing, which is pretty amazing considering the size of it. When they first designed it, and it's put it together from all kinds of different things. That's probably from a helicopter. That is from a Gemini space capsule, the cyclic for it, control. And this is plywood, and that is styrofoam for a roof. Because what they found is that the hydrogen peroxide was spraying out of the thrusters, landing on the pilots and burning them, to burn through their flight suit. So they complained, naturally. And the engineers came up with that. So the roof is polystyrene, so they can eject out of it. And it's not going to harm them. And Neil Armstrong did that. Great guy. He did not listen to the test pilots. He flew this thing in a crosswind above 15 knots and couldn't recover and had to eject out of it. So it did work. Now this is where I am bragging. Not many guys can say they've had flight instruction from an astronaut. I got to fly the simulator in Colorado with Steve Lindsay teaching me what to do. And the target speed was 190 knots. And I touched down 190 knots. This is not because I'm any good, it's because Steve's such a good instructor. But that was a pretty cool thing for me to get. So the last of the trio, SpaceX, we did the captive test and a drop test for them as well. That's Jamie, the guy on the left-hand side, flew with me on the previous drops. And the guy in the middle, Eric Weaver, is the crew chief. So we did the first drop for them. This was rigged. They didn't believe me when I told them it wouldn't work. This was spinning too fast for us to drop. We eventually rigged it through the top. It worked. We dropped it. And that is dropping it off Morro Bay in California. Worked very well. What they didn't tell me before I went there is that they wanted me to recover it as well. A helicopter pilot, hovering is all visual. And hovering over water, when you're looking straight down, is incredibly difficult. It's humiliating. The times I've tried it, it is incredibly hard. They wanted me to recover this from the Pacific Ocean with a swell up to about 6 feet. I was nervous as hell. We figured out something, and between Jamie and I, there's a story in that as well. We managed to recover it. This is flying it back to Morro Bay, and I believe we actually saw 2 blue whales while we were flying it back, so that is a bonus. This is just to show you the Skycrane and the support network that it has when it's operating. You've got a trailer for the mechanics with a whole bunch of tools and spares in there, and then this fuel truck. Now that fuel truck, I can't tell you the exact gallons or liters that it takes. In a couple of good days flying, we can empty that. That thing's burning about 17, when you're putting a lot of power, 5,000 pounds an hour. So you're looking at over 2 tons an hour. For a helicopter, that's a lot. That's in Alaska, building a power line. Very interesting job. Canada in the winter is no fun. Tony was talking about it earlier. That was about minus 40 degrees. We had to wait for it to warm up to minus 35 before we could work. I did not have a lot of fun there. I lie. I had fun, but the cold is miserable. So it leads me into the next thing, and that is the Skycrane is very unique. It has what they call the aft seat. It has 3 pilots in it. You normally fly it with just 2, but this position in the back there, you're facing backwards, so you have a fantastic view. And I got to fly that back seat for probably going on about 5 years or so. There were only about 5 of us in the company that did that. It took a lot of training, a lot of different skills. It's not the average thing to do, because you're actually not the captain of the aircraft when you're sitting in the back there. Because you're controlling the helicopter through the autopilot. If the autopilot breaks, you have no control. So right seat guy is actually in control of the helicopter. But that's a view. So that is Chicago. I was taking off a transformer off the top of that building there. It's 86 floors high. That's Millennium Park down there on the right-hand side. That over there is a cyclic, which normally is between your legs when you're flying any conventional helicopter. In this case, it's a side stick controller, so you have nothing, no obstruction in front of you. The collective over there is directly linked to the flight controls, so that works normally. And the only gauges you've got in the back is the load cell, tells you how much is on the hook, and the torque, which tells you how much power you're putting on the helicopter. Very unique. There you can see the pilots in the front seats, and then another view of the back seat in there. This job meant a lot to me. That is Philadelphia. That's a Philadelphia town hall in the background. Being an immigrant to the United States, Philadelphia is kind of close to my heart, and we were lifting air conditioner units. That's a building again in the left-hand photograph. It is just a pretty cool feeling lifting stuff from the street in front of Philadelphia Town Hall. The right picture just shows some power lines that we put up in Canada, and this is a very interesting job, driving caissons into the ground in areas where they cannot build foundations. This is for power lines. And everything here is flown in, including this caisson, and then once that is driven into the ground, or the water, mud, we would put the next piece on and build the power line from there. That is flying some big lattice structures in Canada. This shows one of the structures. It's been put together, many different pieces. The biggest one that was ever done, I was part of that in Canada, because the snowfall is so heavy in British Columbia, very, very strong towers. The steel was probably, 4 centimeters thick. It was so heavy, I think it took 32 separate pieces to put that tower together. A lot of work goes into it. Ended up doing a project in India for about 6 months, and then finished my time at Ericsson doing antennas. What you see, you're all familiar with the radio mast like that. That is just the structure. The stuff on the top is the actual antennas. That thing doesn't really contain anything. Those contain all the energy. And with different technology, and antennas break, get struck by lightning, they need to be replaced. It's incredibly demanding. That to me was probably the most stressful job that we ever did in the company. The chances of hurting somebody were really high. So I never slept the night before I did one of these jobs. Just a view of it. That one was down in Florida. And there's the antenna. The orange one is the new one that's been put into place. And you can see the size of the people on the side there that had to bolt it on while you're holding onto it. While I was doing that job, I was also flying in my spare time in Kissimmee in Florida for a guy called Tom Richard, and got to fly Harvards again, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Jean got to fly with me on one of those on her birthday, which was yesterday. That guy on the left there, Dave Kuhn, also ex-Air Force guy, owns a company in Florida, in Miami, called Aircrew Training International. He's helped a lot of South Africans. That's him. His dream was to fly in a Skycrane, and I managed to achieve that. We had a Skycrane in Florida, and Brad, the guy who showed you earlier, suggested, why don't we go for a test flight? And I managed to take Dave. He was flying the Skycrane, and I got him and Tom Richard both to fly it. So made his day, made his year. And once again, that's people. So I showed you a previous picture a long time ago of a buddy of mine, Mel. We joined Ericsson the same day. He got offered a job to start up a new division for a company called Colson Aviation. It's a Canadian company, but we got a base in the United States. It was a joint venture with a guy, Han Tan. He had 14 of these Chinooks and 32 Black Hawks. And he wanted to get these all into firefighting. Obviously, not all of them would do it. And I don't think the market could probably withstand that anyway. So this one is on its way to paint, which is why it looks like a rat rod, which is pretty rough. But Mel got me this job, and that's one of the other things I'm very proud of in my life. In the utility helicopter industry, training is very much a sideline. It's expensive, it takes time, so companies don't do it. They don't do a very good job. I didn't like it, and Mel asked me to join him on this, and I was going to be the head of training. So now I had the chance to put my money where my mouth is and set up a training program the way I wanted it set up. Obviously there's money involved as well, so you always cut corners, but I set that up, and to this day I've got guys saying that they like the training, so I feel I achieved something there. I got to fly this Black Hawk, heavy metal. That was the helicopter in Black Hawk Down, the one that did not get shot down, that was flying overhead. So that is a pretty cool thing that I was happy to have got to do. That just shows the Chinook in our current colors, and then that's the size of the Bambi bucket. That's about a 10,000 liter bucket. It's quite a bit of water. That cloud in the background is not a cumulonimbus cloud. That is what they call a cumulus flammatus or a pyrocumulus. The fire, when it gets to a certain size, generates its own weather. So there's so many condensation nuclei, it creates its own cloud like that. And you do not want to fly through that. There's more ash in there than there is water or cloud. But it just shows you how, just the power inside some of these fires. That shows the size of the bucket. And we also have modified the aircraft. There's one in Richmond in Sydney right now, bought by the Rural Fire Service, that we modified. We sold one to them. It's got an internal tank, and that snorkel over there to suck up the water is retractable. It rolls up into a reel, and we can fill that tank also in about between a minute to maybe 80 seconds. And that'll be about 2,500 gallons of water. So yeah, just over 10 tons. That is just a cool photograph on a fire in California. Also got involved in a couple of ferry flights. I like them for some reason. Once again, my problem with volunteering. This first one shows the map. That's North America and South America, Central America, etc. This flight was all the way down to Santa Cruz in Bolivia. We went down there to do some firefighting. The second one was taking a Chinook down to Argentina. Truly amazing flights that I'm very happy I did. Also very stressful at the same time. Because a lot of what you deal with is maps like this, where you just don't have any data. That map, I believe, was printed in 1979. So you can imagine the level of detail involved. Probably something like the maps you guys used in the bush. They weren't very detailed. That lady there was interim president of Bolivia for about a year. She was supposed to remain the interim president. However, she never watched Game of Thrones because she decided to make her own run for president, and she wasn't accepted. 8 days after she quit that job, she was thrown in jail, and she's still in there to this day, unfortunately. So don't mess with the big boys. That was operating out of a town called Guarayas, doing firefighting. Very remote areas. And you guys that come from Africa will appreciate this picture. So that is our fuel truck. Okay, so fuel trucks carry hazmat. They're not allowed to drive on the roads. But it's in the back of a low bed. It's not on the road. Problem solved. So the last thing I did was firefighting at night. Fires do calm down at night. The winds drop, temperatures drop, humidity increases. So in Southern California, the urban areas and urban interface, they've started using helicopters to fight the fires at night to restrict the size of the fires, and it does work. It's also extremely demanding, not very forgiving. That particular fire was near the Getty Center in Los Angeles, and as you guys saw in the news from the last few weeks, how much of Los Angeles was burnt. It's pretty horrific. Our guys were on that fire, and Mel said that the most extreme winds he's ever experienced in like 30 years of flying. It is brutal. Not much you can do. This particular picture was taken on the 4th of July, north of Los Angeles. The crew chief took it. Well, sorry, my flight engineer took it. I must have had a seizure or something, but because I decided I wanted to change. So I went from that one to that one. And that's what brought me to Australia. I can't argue with that because I'm really enjoying it. That is my first day flying the C130 with our chief pilot. And that's what we do with them. Firefighting with the fixed wing is a little bit different from helicopters. Helicopters are purely suppression. You're trying to put the fire out. You're dropping water and you're dropping it directly on the flames. Suppression works differently. Retardant works differently. You're dropping either ahead or to the side of the fire. And what you're doing is you're giving the ground crews time to put the fire out. Aircraft generally do not put out fires. It's the ground guys that put out fires. And I know a lot of you are probably volunteer firefighters. We're there to support you guys. We do not put out the fires by ourselves. Very, very seldom does that happen. As you can see from that, it's pretty low. Our ideal drop height is between 150 to 200 feet. So 30 to 60 meters, roughly. That's just another picture of the C130. We come full circle again. Gary Blaine, that I mentioned a long time earlier for Billings Flying Service. He had never flown C130s, and I happened to be in Billings where he lives, and got talking to him. He came out to look at the aircraft. So, although I'd worked for him 17 years before, here he was. He's still a friend to this day. Even got to go fly his Mustang with him, which was a very, very special achievement for me, or experience for me. And then we come full circle again. That is Gary's aircraft. Gene and I got to fly that up to Alaska for him. He wanted it delivered there. And we landed in Bellingham, Washington. The guy standing there is Jesse Neyman. He was the guy that got me into Ericsson in 2011. And once again, we're still in touch to this day. That is my aircraft. It's a little home-built aircraft, cheap, easy, small. And the color scheme is supposed to remind you of a South African Air Force Harvard. It's not a copy, just orange and silver. And Dave Kuhn, the guy that I got to fly in the Skycrane, was the one who suggested I put the Springbok on the side. And another South African, Louis Devard in Cape Town, was the one who sent me the JPEG that I could print that off on. So a lot of people have helped me along my way in my career, and I've been very, very fortunate in what I've been able to do and see and meet. And it's the people that make all the difference. It doesn't matter what I've done in the past, it's meeting people that's the most important thing. And thank you for your time.
Level 3 in the box now. Okay, a little bit of running coming in. Bump it up 5. Roger. A little bit high. And darkens the track here. 9 is clear of the fire grounds area, inbound to Bustleton for the night. Head there. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Out of your way. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Empty. 50.